this isn't a panel. It's billed as a town hall, which means it's your session, your presence here, your contribution here is what makes this summit work. It's what makes our network work. So we're going to do things a little differently in this one. The panel are here to provoke you. They promised to be as short as possible. I'm going to start by asking them to reflect on what they've heard, about what grabs them, what makes them excited, what any concerns they've got about what they've heard, anything they think that has been omitted that feels really important. I'm going to ask them that question, and then I'm going to go to you. There are microphones here and here. Beat the rush, get there early. Please make your contribution. What's the thought that you're going to leave this summit with? What particularly excites you? Is there anything that particularly concerns you? Is there something that you want to register to your fellow impact actors? This is your moment. And then I'm going to ask, if time allows, a second question, because what strikes me observing this summit for the first time as chair is just what an extraordinary thing we have built together over the last 10 years. And it's not just a network of 40 NABs and many more task forces weighted, 64 countries here, almost 900 people. It's not just the geographical diversity, it's the mix of people and the mix of conversations that take place that feels genuinely unique and special. And this feels like the right moment to ask, how do we make the best use of this network? Given everything that we see in front of us, what do we see now as the role of GSG? And we want to hear your views on that. So please have that in mind, identify where the mics are, and please be ready to engage and contribute, because we want to hear from you. I'm going to ask everyone just to start by say something personal about their lens on this conversation, and then respond to what we've just heard from the excellent panel before. So, Carmen, I'm going to start with you. Okay. You're very welcome. Yeah.
Happy to do so. Carmen Correa, I'm the CEO of ProMujer. Very happy to be here. And let me tell you, you shared yesterday, this is a very powerful room, especially being the last panel. So this speaks very well about the organizers, the Spanish NAB, and also the GSG, how powerful it is to keep us engaged, actually, and we are all here. So I thank you for engaging this amazing group of change makers up to the end. Basically, what brings me in here is the power of this group, the power that we have as a network. It connects. As it was stated in Sebastián, it's a place where we get to meet old friends, new friends, to get to know what's going on, to get to know about the latest trends. And we have to keep up constructing new ways of deploying impact finance in the world, especially, I would say, in Latin America and with a gender lens.
I should say it's been extraordinary how many people have come from Latin America. It's absolutely huge teams from Chile, from Mexico, from all over. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you here. Thank you for coming. So Nick, you've been on this journey literally from the first day. So I would love your perspective on this, on what you've heard, and reflections on the journey.
Yes, so you're right, Nick. I've been on it since the very first day with Ronnie, whatever that was, 10 years or so ago. Today I'm the Chief Executive of British International Investment, which is the organisation formerly known as CDC, which is the UK's development finance institution. So you asked Nick to react to what we heard in the previous panel and to be a little bit maybe provocative. So I don't want to, I feel a little guilty reacting to Chris's comments on her birthday, but I'm being provocative, but let me do that anyway. Look, I think she talked, and obviously her group talked about mobilization, and they talked about blended finance, and they talked about the responsibilities of the DFIs. I mean, I think if you're really honest about it, blended finance has not delivered on since we first thought of the term, whatever that was, 7 or 8 or 9 years ago. The principal reason, in my view, why it hasn't delivered is because what we tried to do is too complex, and it's not standardized. And I think there's too high an expectation, frankly, on the commercial partners that too much of their risk will be taken away by some government-owned entity waving a magic wand. That is not the reality of mobilization and blended finance. It is a very scarce resource. Actually, almost none of it exists at the DFI community. Some of it exists in the MDB community. So you've got pools like the private sector window, you've got EFSD at the EU, you've got the Global Climate Fund. Those are the large pools of potential, and some of the foundations. Those are the large pools of blended finance. But we're not going to get billions to trillions. We have in the context of the problems that we're trying to solve, we have a very small amount. So what's important is that we use that concessionality in really to address the most difficult issues. So, for example, my responsibilities at BII go across Asia and Africa. That's where we invest. I see very little reason to be deploying blended finance or highly concessionary finance in the vast majority of countries in Asia today. I mean, those countries are generally growing very rapidly. They have increasing access, most of them, to commercial capital. There is a desperate need for blended finance in Africa, where we have almost no, frankly, very little visibility of the impact investment community. So when we're looking at the blended finance question at BII, to the extent that we have any even remotely concessionary finance, that's where we're going to be tailoring it. I don't think there's enough discussion, enough sort of segmentation in this discussion around blended finance of who needs it and who doesn't. And then the other thing I would say is within the sort of climate finance versus, I'd like to say climate finance versus development finance, because of course in many cases they're one and the same thing. But there is still, when you listen to this dialogue around reform of the MDBs and so on, there's too much attention, in my view, being given to how we can use this precious concessionary capital to try to do things which may create large mobilization ratios, which, by the way, is not the way to look at the effectiveness of blended finance. The way to look at it is what the impact is being created. You focus on mobilization ratios, you do the easy, close to commercial things. So I think focusing on making sure that we are not losing sight of the fact that obviously we have at least two massive problems in the world. One is solving the climate emergency. The other one is development, and I'd say particularly around Africa, and that is the toughest place to find the capital for. It's almost exclusively dominated at the moment by DFIs. That's where we need the impact investment.
Thanks, Nick. It'll be very interesting to get Dollars to that at the end. But I'm going to ask Margot to come in here. Margot, Ford Foundation have been fantastic supporters of GSG for a long time, and you observe very carefully what we're doing in the system that we sit in. Fascinating to hear your perspective, along with our thanks for your support over many years.
Well, thank you, and thank you for including me in this august group. Yes, I'm from the Ford Foundation, based in New York City, and my team, which is called Mission Investments, has 3 pools of capital. So we manage a $1 billion market rate impact investing pool of capital from our endowment. We have about a $350 million catalytic capital portfolio, which in US foundation terms is called program-related investment capital. And we have a grant budget where we try to build the ecosystem, recognizing that while Ford is large by US foundation standards, we're a drop in the ocean. And so we're very proud to support the GSG as well as several of the individual country NABs. And in terms of what has struck me about this summit, I think there's probably 3 things. One is just the tremendous hospitality of the Spanish NAB and the people of Malaga. I come from New York City. You're lucky if someone will point you to the nearest subway station while they keep walking. And here it's just felt like this tremendous and warm hospitality, and I feel so grateful. The second is the relative absence of conversation about the ESG backlash. Any meeting I've attended in the US over the past 18 months has focused heavily on how politicized these topics have become in the US. And I consider that a blessing, not an omission. I think it's been an enormous distraction in the US over the past 18 months. And so it's been a real relief, frankly, to not have that dominate the conversations here. And then third, I think I'd pick up on what Nick mentioned. You know, blended finance comes up everywhere. It came up frequently when I was in Jakarta and in Singapore earlier this year. It comes up when I talk to colleagues in Latin America. And I think to have an intelligent conversation about blended finance, you really need diverse stakeholders. I mean, you need the different participants in a blended facility to be in conversation with each other, as opposed to foundations talking to one another and pension funds talking to one another in silos. And so I think the real diversity of this group makes it an appropriate venue to talk about blended finance. But to Nick's point, there's also way too little concessionary capital. It's very precious money. And so we can't afford to be undisciplined. We can't afford to be sloppy and to repeat mistakes that others have made. And so I think this practice of sharing and leapfrogging each other's successes as well as our failures will help ensure that we make the best possible use of what is a pretty finite resource.
Margaret, thank you so much. Ming-Shu, I'm going to come to you now with many thanks, again, for your contribution on the steering committee of our Impact Task Force. You bring the perspective from Korea, which sits at a really fascinating point on the spectrum of development now. You've been in government, I think, for 24 years, so you bring that perspective as well. What are your reflections, what you heard in the previous session and in the summit?
Thank you, Nick. I'm a chairman of Korean Standards Association, KSA, also member of ITF and member of IFVI. The most important thing resonated with me is the transparency and assurance and disclosures. Let me share Korea's experience regarding ESG. Korea is now recently entered in the developed state, but we are long time in developing countries, and we are very late compared to the other part of the world in ESG and impact economy, but we are catching up very rapidly. Let me share some numbers. When the voluntary disclosure of the sustainability report is introduced in Korea in the year 2003, in 20 years, only 3 companies disclosed the sustainability report in Korea, including Samsung. But nowadays, last year, 309 companies disclosed voluntarily. And the ESG fund is now more than 250 billion, 25 billion US dollars in Korea. It's a lot. And nowadays, the sustainability report disclosure is become mandatory from the year 2025, and there are global standards of the ISSB and ESRS. And so, but to compare the sustainability report, we need some to ensure the consistency, accuracy, and reliability of sustainability data. The KSA has been designated the verifier of the greenhouse gas emission in Korea under the Ministry of Environment in Korea, and we have been for 14 years the United Nations CDC Clean Development CDM mechanism, and utilizing the experience, we are building up strong, stable ecosystem for the sustainable data. But to ensure, but nowadays the big companies have to report the small and medium companies' carbon emission by the scope 3. And, for example, Samsung, they have more than 2,000 SMEs supplying to Samsung parts and goods and services. And so to tackle this one, to prepare the Korean small and medium companies, this year we are operating the capacity building program for small and medium companies. It's about 500 companies this year, utilizing the Korea's public fund and utilizing the big companies' money. And very interesting is that one small company, they didn't know, and they cannot calculate the greenhouse gas emission before. And then after our training program, they can measure it, and after that, they can manage it, and they can reduce the carbon emissions. So if you measure it, you can manage it. And if you manage it, you can improve it. So capacity building for SME is very important.
Thank you so much for that. And that prompts me just to make a little news announcement here, because what struck me, and through this summit, having attended summits before, is this theme of impact transparency has grown within our movement, and of course, for all the reasons that Santi explained, and through the Impact Task Force we were asked to set up by the British G7 presidency to look at this issue. We went very big on impact transparency as a key enabler, a key driver of change in behavior, and called for a transformation in the supply of information to investors. But we also made the argument that this couldn't be a conversation dominated by rich economies and big companies. And we made a strong argument for the need for inclusivity in this process. And I'm delighted to announce that the British government, having supported us in the task force, has now asked for our help as GSG in running a program to encourage inclusivity, to make sure that emerging and developing economies and SMEs are very much part of this conversation. And this is something we will be reaching out to you as NABs to enlist your support in that. And I think it's a really interesting bridge between the Impact Task Force and the NAB community. But here we have a British government, a major government, asking for our help as a network to drive that and support them in that agenda. And I hope you're welcome. Thank you for your personal leadership over many years. Korea are ahead of many on this issue, and you deserve our congratulations. Dolaka, I'm going to come to you next, perhaps just to share your personal lens on this, but any reflections of what you've heard in this session or the one before.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's wonderful to be here, very energizing, very uplifting, but also, by the end of the day now, very much cause for reflection. And I'll just say a little bit personally. I am Dolaka Banda from Zambia. I also sit on the board of BII, but more recently partnered with 5 other individuals across the globe, so we're all from different regions, to start a company called Mondiale Impact. Briefly put, the company is focused on the importance of governance for impact and the importance of impact for governance. And I'll let that sit with everybody in terms of how you interpret it. But the two are very interrelated in our minds. And so why did that resonate with me? Which is why GSG resonated with me. And I was so pleased and so honored to become an ambassador. Because for me, it's a personal story. It's about my personal values, my personal ambition, my personal mission. When I sit on a podium like this, I always ask myself, why in this room and why me? And therefore, I take sitting up here extremely responsibly, because I feel that I am representing the excluded, is what I like to call them, as opposed to the included. So I am coming from a region where, we heard some of this yesterday, population is just over 50% women, and just over 60 to 70% youth. And this youth are branded in all the imagery as hopeless, helpless, poor. And I want to change that, because it's not absolutely true. So I want to bring that different image. And so for me, being in this room, being part of this group, 1, it is global. 2, it is about closing the gaps. Closing the gaps, and it's been expressed in many different ways by the feedback that we got today. But primarily for me is closing this gap that we keep talking about between 3 trillion and 5 trillion. Whether you're talking SDGs or gender, the gap is there. And so for me, closing that gap means, but we have commitments. They don't match that gap that we're talking about, but they could make a massive difference if from commitment they could go to disbursement. And so I think GSG has matured to a level now where we should be thinking about unblocking the barriers. Why is the money not reaching fast enough? Urgently enough? Is it our perceptions of risk? Is it our disbursement processes? Is it the way we structure the documents? I think there's a lot of work for us to do here because the willingness is there. We just heard you say, Nick. The willingness is there and the effort is there, but the outcome is where we are missing. So out of this conversation, I hope before we close, we can actually touch on that as well. The other gap that I'd like to close is this gap that for us to be seen, us being in this room, myself included, to be seen to be doing good for Africa, it is about poverty alleviation. That we must be responsible in our interventions for poverty alleviation. On the other side, putting on my Africa hat, an Africa women hat, I don't want to talk about poverty. I want to talk about economic employment. I want to talk about getting capital so that I can grow my SME and then employ people, and then that will alleviate poverty. So I think I want to close that gap, that changing Africa is going to be about the conversation of poverty alleviation through, that already puts your mind at a lower level of intervention. It's got to be at the capital markets, intensive intervention, intentional, deliberate, and significant in terms of the numbers. So that's one gap I'd like to close. But I also want to close the reverse gap, the dependency from our nations on the international community. The solution has got to come from within us, with the help of whoever we need. So to that extent, everything that I heard resonates because I live in both worlds. But one thing that I hope we can have more of at the next GSG in Costa Rica, did I hear right? Yeah? Is more African representation on the panels at the higher level. So more policy-making people at the higher level so that they can share. When I listen to the mayor of Andalusia, I so wished my mayor was here so that he could hear it from his compatriot and learn and be challenged. So there is a gap to be closed the other way too. So I am here to, and because GSG has allowed me to take something that is intensely deep, it's my values, it's my purpose, it's my mission, from deep inside of me, and be able to bring it to the surface in the hope that together we can exchange those lessons, we can collaborate more, and then after Costa Rica, I hope you can come to Africa. Anywhere, as long as it's in the region for GSG. So let me leave it there for now.
Dr. Beautiful, and thank you. And I hesitate to correct you, but it's the GLM that is going to Costa Rica.
It's the GLM.
Just in case people are already starting to Google hotels in Costa Rica. But look, thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard from the panel. I hope you've been provoked. Is there stuff that resonates? Is there stuff that jars? Feel free to ignore the panel. Feel free to respond to anything that you've heard over the last day and a half. But we'd love just to open the mics up to you. I know you're probably tired. Your brain is fried. But this is a moment to contribution. There is no need to ask a question. This is open for commentary, for observation, preferably not keynote speeches, but this is a moment for you. If you don't take it, I'm going back to the panel. So if anyone would like to ask a question, start making a direction towards the mic. Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself. And
Yeah, I'm Marcello Palazzi, co-founder of the B Corp movement in Europe. I love what you're doing. I've been to 4 or 5. I think there's something that I'd like to add. So impact is a bit anonymous. I want to see some of the entrepreneurs behind impact. To me, I was thinking it's a bit like talking about beauty in the dark. You don't see nature, you don't see art. Because ultimately, it is the entrepreneurs who make impact. So my suggestion is, do bring in some entrepreneurs who are actually the actors of the impact. And it makes it very lively and actually very concrete. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And
Very good.
I know that point has resonated strongly. So thank you for making it. Sir, good to see you. Yeah.
Yes, hi, thank you so much. It's my first GSG conference, and I just want to say how impressed I am with the enthusiasm and interest in terms of social impact. But the real elephant in the room, in addition to climate change, as Nick had pointed out, is poverty. And I want to applaud Dalika for focusing on poverty and her response. Poverty is the greatest threat to democracies and to business on the planet, bar none. And we need to really focus on how we can bring impact down to the bottom of the pyramid, the poorest on the planet. These are the nations that are bringing refugees here to Europe and refugees to the United States. So we have to look at impact investment very much keyed at the bottom of the pyramid, the world's poorest in addition to climate. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for coming to your first GSG Summit. And we've talked, and congratulations on everything that you're doing. So did you want to make a contribution? Yeah.
Yes, I would like, I'm a person who just started to work in impact investing a few years ago. So I would like to hear from you a personal story about what seemed very difficult at the beginning of your career, something that people thought was unreachable, and that you've seen that we surpassed that to get some inspiration for us starting.
Great. Can I go to the panel on that? Yeah? Yeah. So, moments in your career when you looked up at the mountain and thought, wow, that looks difficult, and climbed it. Or didn't.
Yeah, well,
We've given you a few mountains to climb.
yeah, moments. Sitting in Ronnie Cohen's basement in Portland Place in 2011, trying to figure out how I could get the printer to work. And thinking about how, Ronnie being upstairs, thinking about how we could try to create a movement. At the time, there were some sort of bits and pieces, but it was by no means a movement. And to go from that point to today, just looking around and just the caliber of people, the sort of in the broadest sense, the diverse and inclusive nature of this whole thing, I just think it's a fantastic, it really is fantastic to be part of it.
Anyone, any other moments where you gazed into the face of the impossible and now look back with pride or?
Yeah.
Maybe an example. Oh, I'm sorry, Dalika.
You go ahead, and then I'll go.
I was just going to piggyback because it's the same vintage. Nick and I, and probably some other people here, were part of some meetings in 2007 and 2008 where the term impact investing was coined or applied in many cases to work that had preceded it. And I was at the Rockefeller Foundation at the time, and we were fortunate to be able to contribute to some early ecosystem building. But I remember wondering if the term would ever catch on. And like we had a media tracker to see would the term impact investing ever show up. And the first time that it did, in an Indian regional newspaper, like we all had a party in the office because none of us had talked to the reporter. And now there's, dozens, if not hundreds, a month, and the conversation isn't about how we cheerlead the concept into existence, it's how we safeguard its integrity, because so many people have decided to adopt the term. So I don't know which is a better or a more challenging situation to be in, but really in the space of 15 years, it's at least rhetorically had enormous growth and easily, I think could have not gone anywhere, at least as a term and as a community of practice.
And for me, because my mind, when you asked the question, went back to 2011, when I was a minister in the British government leading our work to build out what we call social investment at the time. And our opportunity was to make a case for the use of what we call dormant assets in the system to capitalize the institution that we thought was going to be the catalytic institution that Ronnie designed in his mind, and we got Nick to lead it, but it needed to be capitalized at the right level. And our ambition was to go for 100% of the dormant asset allocation, to go for 400 million, and then go and get 200 million of equity from the 4 biggest banks in the country, and gulp. And we did it. And that 600 million balance sheet has turned into a £9 billion impact investment market in the UK. And that's why I was so excited to see the Spanish case study today of the new fund that's been enabled by EU, which has so many parallels with what we did in the UK. But thank you for a wonderful sort of question, because many of us are, dreamers and optimists looking at big challenges in our market, and thank you for sort of prompting that conversation. Dolika, I didn't mean to interrupt you, I just wanted
It was
to...
me, I talked over.
Please.
I'll forgive you. Thank you. No, it's about banking, actually. It was during my IFC days, I can say it, because it's public information. And we had always said Africa was one of our key markets, and yet we had very little exposure to Africa. I was in the capital markets department, financial markets. We had a portfolio of $200 million with 4 banks, 2 South African white-owned banks, 1 Kenyan and 1 Nigerian, Citi and Equity Bank at that time, so it was good. And we sat as a department led by an African VP and myself as director, and said, this is not good enough. It's a chink in what is needed. Nigeria had just changed their laws, regulatory banking system, multiplied the requirements for capital 10 times. There was no bank in the country that was going to be able to raise that kind of money. So we put together a country package. So we put together as well an Africa strategy, and we said we're going to go 10 times, the same level that the Nigerian Central Bank has increased, our portfolio is going to increase by the same. We went to the committee and the board that we want to bring our exposure in Africa to $2 billion. They looked at us, and the question on their foreheads was, what are you guys smoking? Does risk agree with this? We had bullied risk into asking. We made that investment in a year. We reached the $2 billion in 1 year. There was absorption capacity. We did not lose money in Nigeria. It was about structuring for that risk. And I say this just to give the example of what we've been talking about in this room, the perception of risk and our traditional ways of looking at investments. That to say, there was a word courage used in the feedback. Takes a leap of faith. Takes a lot of courage to go against the grain, but it can be done. So to your point of here, 10 years later with GSG and the computers are working, that for me was a moment of trial, challenge, and success.
Yeah.
Well done.
Thank you.
Dolika, thank you for that, and thank you for your forgiveness. If there are no other questions or comments, please, yeah.
Thank you. My name's Olivia Tyler. I'm from Australia. This is my first GSG Impact Summit too, and it has been fabulous to see such a global audience. I have 2 points. One, that I really would love to see a greater emphasis, I guess, on the capabilities that practitioners need to be able to operate in an impact environment. I have a sustainability and ESG background and have kind of found my way into impact because I do think there's a really strong nexus. So how do we bring those two, I guess, the sustainability ESG practitioner group into an impact conversation? And also, what are the capabilities that we need, not just a global language, but also how do we actually start to augment practitioners in all spheres to start to think about impact in a much more holistic way? So that's what I'd like to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And again, you're very, very welcome to your first summit. Australia's always been a very important part of our ecosystem, and you're very, very welcome. Any other comments or questions? I'm going to seg into the second half. Yeah, beg your pardon, please. You're very welcome.
Quick prompt. Thank you so much. It's a great event. Reflecting on the past couple of days and the conversations that you've had, I've heard some of the big buckets in the spectrum of of action, from the data flows to regulation to, by the way, I'm Carlos Solano with IFBI, to the auditors, and then it's finally making decisions on all of that. But I wonder if you've come away with anything new as part of that infrastructure, if you will, from your experience in how finance data and regulatory and all the map, if you will, if you've come away with any new pieces that we could all support in, any new items that you've come away with.
Thank you for that. And I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that or follow up with you directly after this. Please do. But thank you for that. Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Jackie Groberski with Humane Society International. I was very excited to hear a lot about the comments regarding innovative solutions and collaboration, but I'd like to see more solutions for channels where stakeholders can communicate important issues that need innovative impact solutions. For example, improving animal welfare throughout the supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Any commentary on those?
Yeah, I actually think that's a really good point, because we do sometimes in the impact investment community and the development finance community, we don't often have as close a dialogue as we should have with people, with some of the organizations that are really at the cutting edge of some of these important issues, and that is an important issue. And so I do think that's an important point.
And thank you for making it. Thank you for the challenge to us. Any other comments and questions? Otherwise, I'll just.
Hello.
Hi, Nick.
Yeah, sorry, because with the lights it's hard to see, but thank you.
My name is Sarah Dobson-James, and I'm with the Global Alliance of Impact Lawyers. I just wanted to share that this has been a very inspiring event, and hearing Margot talking about coining that term impact investment and being in that room when that happened and wondering how long that would take before the market grabbed hold of the idea is particularly inspiring. We launched last year, and on the basis that we believe that all lawyers should be advising businesses and investors with a lens of how to have a more positive impact on people and planet at the same time as maintaining their professional obligations. And hopefully, eventually, we won't need to exist, and impact lawyers will simply be all of the legal practitioners. So lovely to connect with you all, and if anyone wants to reach out and collaborate, we're here.
Wow. It's not often you hear a lawyer saying, hopefully we won't need to exist. But I didn't know there was a global alliance of impact lawyers, and that's amazing news, and tells me that something's happening, and you're very, very welcome, and congratulations on the initiative, and we look forward to working with you. So
I have the mic, so can I go with my question?
Yes, please. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
My name is Seema Chaturvedi. I'm founder of Gender Smart Fund, AWE Funds. So here's building on the perceived risk. My submission to the audience and the leaders at the podium is capital allocation made more efficiently and effectively can drive a lot of change. Number 5 has a domino effect on the balance of the 16 SDGs. Can we request the leaders to consider effective allocation to first-time female fund managers, because they are a strong catalyst? You have one sitting right next to you, and I'm one of them as well, so self-serving. We can together drive serious grassroots change, but somebody has to get over this perception of risk with gender smart, first-time female fund managers. Thank you. And I would recommend, if somebody is listening, let's set a target for saying 20-30% of the allocations go to female fund managers.
That's great to hear.
I think you're going to get a reaction from the panel.
Basically, women, we are 50% of the population. So if we are not including a gender perspective in our investments processes or in our organizations, we are missing half of the opportunities out there. So we have to be very conscious about that. And of course, we need to train more women to get into the sector. We need more women entrepreneurs. We need more investors. but we also have to make sure that we develop the proper products, the proper services, so that women can access those. So we have been changing, as ProMujer, we have been adapting ourselves because the needs have been changing. And actually, when we were born, for example, internet wasn't there, so digital education wasn't needed, digital health wasn't needed, so digital financial services were not needed. So right now we have to develop new products, new services, thinking on the needs of those women. But for that, you have to get to know the communities. You have to really get to know what are those needs, and you have to include them in the development of those new products and those new services. So you need to include a gender perspective when you are investing.
I don't disagree with any of that. I think this would be sort of a good moment to pay tribute to Suzanne Beagle, who many of you in this room will know, who has tragically passed away 2 weeks ago. And Suzanne was really such a leader in this community in terms of driving gender-smart investing and investing with the gender lens. And we're absolutely not where we need to be, but there are people who have made who are really beginning to move that needle, and she was definitely one of them.
Oh, thank you, Nika. We did pay tribute to her yesterday, but we should also recognise that, the CDC, BII, unless Dolika disagrees with me, because there's always more that can be done. Personally, I'm proud of the leadership shown by the institution in terms of stepping into the 2X collaborative and that DFI collaboration to substantially increase the investment in empowerment. So. Congratulations to you and the institution. Dolika, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I just wanted to add two things very, very quickly. If I am a shareholder of a company, I would not be convinced that you're giving me optimum shareholder value if you are excluding 50% of the population for investment or intervention. So that's one. Number two, I have never heard that there is empirical evidence that women are bad creditors. In fact, I've heard the opposite. Banks will lend to women because when a woman borrows because she needs to actually grow something. And related to that is the multiplier effect of when a dollar gets into the hands of a woman, particularly in emerging communities. For every dollar you give to one woman, there are 6 beneficiaries at the end. So she's not going to mess around with your dollar. I just wanted to add what you were saying, Colin.
I can just pile on with one more data point, if I may, on our endowment sort of market rate allocation to impact. About 2/3 of our committed capital are to what we call diverse fund managers. So in a US context, diverse means both by gender and race. And we're not in the habit of disclosing our financial returns annually, in part because we want to move away from that as a short-term mindset. But we did do a 5-year report card last year where we disclosed that we have exceeded 3-fold our target financial returns with a substantially diverse fund manager base. So, and part of the reason that we felt moved to disclose that is to begin to just build this drumbeat of proof points to say, actually, this is not a trade-off. This is how you do well by doing good, or whatever your favorite saying is.
But the data point that was mentioned earlier becomes very important because that's what we relate to, and that's a uniform unit of measure that we can use.
Thank you all so much. Let me, unless there's anyone at the back, there are microphones at the back.
I have a comment here.
Yep, please, you're welcome.
Thank you. My name is Richard Tugume.
Thank you.
I'm based out of Uganda in East Africa, and I represent the work of the Global Social Impact Investments Fund in the region, East Central and Southern Africa. For me, the way I look at these conferences is an opportunity to have different front lines of the same war against the same enemy, to take stock of the state of the war and the battle, learn from each other before we go back to our respective trenches. So in that respect, I'm going to give just 2 summary reports of what my trenches look like. The first scenario is that in regards to what needs to change to get better and more effective results in this impact investment space, is that in as much as I believe in the need to show courage, what I think needs to be a little modified is that courage should change from not just the owners of the monies. To give an example, there was a session I attended yesterday where there was a talk about pension managers having the courage to invest in impact investment space. And for me, in as much as that is a good thing, I also think that what needs to change, even more importantly, is that the owners of the pension money, the pensioners themselves, as an example in that particular example, need to have a change of mindset to allow the managers of their money to take that courage. Because what typically happens, if the pension manager took the courage to invest in impact investment and lost the money, he has no chance to explain that loss to his pensioners, who are the owners of the money. So the mindset needs to change, not just from the owners of the money or the managers of the money, but the actual owners of the money, who are me and you, in this room. And that needs to be a systemic thing that goes across the board, so that the entire scenario changes. And just to borrow an analogy from the farming world, I also happen to be a commercial farmer, and a lot of my portfolio is in smallholder farming. Capitalism, as it stands, we are in agreement about the fact that there is excessive greed, right? Unchecked greed to some extent, because profit is being made at the expense of everything else, including people and planet. And so in my farming example, in my analogy, the most typical greedy animal is the pig that eats so much and does not care about what it leaves for anyone else. And in as much as we agree with that, what is not in agreement is the approach of how do we deal with this pig? How do we mitigate the excesses of the pig? And I feel that if we don't change our own mindset as individuals to appreciate the fact that we can have a decent life without being excessively greedy, we will simply be replacing a need for a heart surgery for the pig. We need to change the whole heart for it, and we are simply putting lipstick on the mouth of the pig, which will not change what it is. It will still eat the same, it will behave the same, but nothing will change. My second comment is in respect to what I call last mile impact. And in this one is that in as much as it's important to provide funding to impact investment, to improve jobs, improve incomes at the BOP, that is not necessarily enough. Why? Because there's a difference between an increased income and an improved livelihood. And the two are not necessarily the same. An extra effort needs to be put in translating those incomes into improved livelihoods by providing the beneficiaries with the tools necessary for them to make that conversion. So I think that is, for me, food for thought for the movement and for the GSG movement, for the impact investment family, to think of how we actually deal with those issues in very deliberate ways, in very thoughtful ways, that will then produce much more effective results going forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing us so much of the value of these gatherings is getting the ground truth from different countries, different regions, where every context is different. To your point, a very important point around mobilizing the customer. That surely is one of the strongest tailwinds behind our movement, which is customers, investors want something different, right? But they just need better information. And so, to your point, in the UK, for example, the British filmmaker Richard Curtis involved many of us in a campaign called Make My Money Matter, simply trying to connect British citizens with the question, what are they doing with my money? And most people have no idea at all. So thank you for making those points. Much appreciated. Sir, thank you very much.
Hello. Ola Malaga, what a wonderful few days over here, amazing. I would like to quote Martin Luther King. with all these wonderful people, what we thought over here for last 2-3 days, there will be challenges. So I'd like to quote him: if you can't run, you walk. If you can't walk, you crawl. But move on. Things will be better for sure. And to all these wonderful people, again, I would like to say, big clap for you guys, It was amazing. I met few people who were really, really passionate, and I can see through their eyes. I hope we are more than LinkedIn connection, and things will be better for sure in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for saying what many of us feel. We've got just under 7 minutes. I'm just going to ask the panel very quickly an answer to a question that's in my mind. So over the last decade, everyone in this room, whether you're a new NAB or have been part of a NAB that's been around for a long time, I feel that we have built something very special here in terms of this family, this community, this network. It's in my experience, the word unique is overused, but what we have here is unique, not just in terms of the geographic diversity, but in terms of the different actors and voices in the room: investors, enterprise, government, intermediaries. We're trying to bring people together to have the conversation. And we've built something very special. So the question in my mind is, where do we go from here? How do we make the best use of this network? I'd love just some very quick, 1 minute perhaps, perspectives from the panel, and then we'll take any contributions to the floor and close the session.
For me, this is, as I said, it's a great network, and actually it's difficult to find an organization that brings together different actors, and it's not easy to do so. So what we need moving forward, for me, is much more collaboration among all the organizations and individuals participating in this space. It's much more communication, and I think everybody has a key role in this network, but we don't have to compete. The need is huge, so we have to collaborate. We have to coordinate much more, and that is what I think we will need to be looking into.
Nick, you've been on this journey all the way through. What would you like to see next?
Well, look, I completely agree with you. This is a unique, no other organization brings together, as I said earlier, such a diverse and in such an inclusive way, such a group of people. And many of you, I suppose, will be going on to The Hague or to Copenhagen to Gin, and you'll see a completely different group. And if you're really unfortunate, you'll be going to the World Bank in Marrakesh next week, and you'll see a group, again, development focused, but a very different group. So this is unique because I think because it represents in an equal way so many different countries, and I think that does give it a unique opportunity to have influence at the local level. Somebody on one of the earlier panels was talking about the importance of domestic capital markets, for example, again particularly in Africa, and the importance of ensuring those domestic capital markets develop in a way that sort of embraces impact. And I think that the existence of the NABs in 40 or 41 different countries and the ability to learn from all these other, to share information and to share knowledge across this network gives us an extraordinary opportunity to actually have influence to ensure that those capital markets develop, and not just in developing markets, but all around the world, develop in a way that really embraces impact.
Thank you so much. I think a gentleman's got the mic.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is Ali Özgür from Turkey. NeedsMap is a social and digital cooperative. We got like 30 million transactions so far, but we are working a lot on earthquakes. So my family side is from also the earthquake region in the recent earthquake that 50,000 people lost their lives. And I know in many parts of the world, because of climate, because of increasing human population, now we are 8 billion. Just 200 years ago, the world population was 1.5 billion. So in post-disaster areas, there's much more funding is required. So, and also all the discussions were so enriching for me for the last 2 days. And what I've learned is like, there's huge tendency to invest on social problems, other issues, but there's also a need to also provide like emergency funds in post-disaster areas. Bonds, other things are available, but there is also need for less bureaucracy to allocate those fundings. Just to give 2 examples and also to ask your opinions on this. 2 years ago, we got Izmir earthquake, and we got a funding from Facebook Foundation. It took 14 months to lend the money, $100,000. It took like 38 signatories and to take this money. And with UPS Foundation, we brought 10 airplanes to earthquake area with full of tents from Africa and Dubai. But we rarely find tents in the Europe. So stocks, where the availability, transparency of impact is so critical, I believe. So data, openness, and rapid allocation of funds, I believe, is one of the problems of the next generation. Just to emphasize this location-based funding and emergency allocation of funding and less bureaucracy and transparency, I would like to emphasize. And thanks, I believe, because of this recent earthquake, what we have seen that from UK to Canada to Australia, we got huge support from international community. So I believe network capital is critical, and such organizations like GSG is so critical. This network, I believe one day in one place, if any earthquake, any disaster happens, this community will help each other a lot, and existence and keeping this community is so critical. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for making those really important points and linking them to your very valuable work, which we congratulate you on. Thank you so much. Dolika, I'd like to ask you to close just with that question. You're one of our ambassadors, and we thank you for that. But you know this network well. What would you like to see from this network over the next few years?
You know, the gentleman who just spoke from Turkey, I relate to what he's saying. You will hear me in every event talk about, I would love to see GSG be in the forefront of actually shifting the capital from where it is sitting and has been committed to the outcome. Because until we see that capital on the ground and working, this will continue to be a think tank. And I am in enough think tanks, and I'm sure many people here are in enough think tanks. How do we translate this global platform, which is truly a treasure to have, and that has all the pillars of what it takes to make change? Policymakers, accountants, lawyers, finance people. How do we leverage this so that that money gets out to where it is absolutely needed and where it will be multiplied?
Thank you. That's the right challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, time is up. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for contributing to it so well and significantly. Could you join me in thanking our panel?